Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The controversial firing of Bill Johnson immediately following the completion of the Duke Progress Energy merger made big headlines this past summer. And while that may be more strategically about social issues around the combined company, it does highlight the vulnerability and unresolved issues that can plague and easily happen at any firm, and in this case, at one of the nation's now largest energy companies. Thanks for watching the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and more broadly, energy and energy policy this time on CBR, and later on the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, Jack Gerard.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, health care, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising health care costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded August 23, 2012. On this week's program, Jeffrey Merrifield of Shaw's Power Group, Willis Whichard of the Scientific Advisory Panel on Offshore Energy, and special guest Jack Gerard, President and CEO of American Petroleum Institute. Now, Chris William.
Welcome again. Thanks for being here. Jeff, good to have you on the program. Judge, welcome and thanks for coming. You know, I want to start with something here, Jeffrey, and I want to start with you. Recently, there was an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that highlighted the fact that record lows, and I'll say it this way, 82% of respondents in this poll disapproved of the job that Congress has been doing, both the lower house and the upper house here. When you take that kind of disillusionment, maybe is a good way to say it, and you apply it to energy and energy policy, do you kind of groan inside and say, gosh, you know, we need some energy reform here and now we're farther away from it? Or is there some opportunity in here? How do you look at those kind of statistics?
Well, I always try to be an optimist. It goes to the heart of your question, though. I mean, I think what Americans are seeing at this point in Washington is that Congress has gotten very good at not doing things. And there's really a mantra to stop things from happening. And I think what the American people are asking for is Congress to really focus on issues that matter. And for us, certainly, energy is clearly an issue that matters. There are changes that Congress can make to incentivize greater energy production here in the United States, and I think people want that to happen. I say I'm encouraged because hopefully when we have the turn of the year, we get through the election, we get a new Congress, we get an administration, whether it's the current one or Governor Romney taking over, hopefully we can get a refocus on energy issues and really move us forward, because it's an important economic driver we need to focus on. You know,
Judge, in the same context here, you just came out from, well, not just, but recently came out from underneath this special panel that you chaired for Governor Perdue in North Carolina, and you presented the report. Going through the process of this and looking at what energy and what energy policy going forward for the old North State is, how does what Jeff say, and how does the question that I originally asked, how does that square with you?
I think this is a great problem we have these days. I have a good friend who is a friend of Steny Hoyer, the #2 Democrat in the House. He says he was talking to Steny recently and said it's small comfort to have your polling numbers at 5% when the Congress as a whole is 3%. It's better than that, but not much. I served 10 years in the state legislature. It wasn't this way then. We got together and worked things out. Some of the most important things I did, I had a substantial number of members of the other party supporting my legislation. So as Jeff has said, hopefully when we get the presidential election behind us, if the president is reelected, he can't run again. Maybe then people can get behind him and do the things that need to be done, or if we have a new administration, simply focus ahead in addressing energy and other problems that we're facing.
You know, I want to ask the question, and I don't think we have time to go down the road, but what happened to statesmanship? But we'll leave it there. Let's go to the heart of energy.
It's not what it was, that's for sure.
Yeah, clearly. The heart of energy in North Carolina, pretty landmark decision by the legislature this year, and that was to legalize fracking. Judge, I want to stay with you. Legalizing fracking in North Carolina does not mean that North Carolina is going to begin drilling right away. What does this mean going forward? Does this give North Carolina the first mover advantage? Does it open up many things? Is there going to be a challenge we haven't thought about? How do you look at this?
The legislation puts in place a process moving toward engaging in that endeavor. There's a commission that is in the process of being appointed that will govern and regulate the process, develop the rules and regulations. So I would say we have moved in that direction. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it. I would think local governments are going to weigh in on this. I was with the mayor of Sanford earlier this week. That, of course, is an area where there is believed to be a lot of natural gas underground. The greatest concern she expressed about it was that so many of the places where they would do this drilling are very close to the river, and the river is the town's water supply. And the great concern that's been expressed about fracking is that it pollutes water, uses water, and we already know that we have a water shortage. I know a very eminent scientist who is absolutely convinced we're going to run out of water and it's too late to avoid that. Now, I hope he's wrong, but clearly we have a concern about water supply. So hopefully the folks regulating the process will take account of both economy and environment and find what we need to do.
I think on the fracking, you know, my background is originally environmental, and I think we can craft ways as a state, as states, and as a country to deal with air and water emissions from these facilities. The other part of the fracking discussion, though, is the jobs, and in this economy, you've got to talk about what does this mean. Obviously, initially, there's some drilling activities that would take place in various parts of the Carolinas, particularly North Carolina. You have the opportunities for building pipelines, pipe fabrication, you know, facilities. Our company operates some pipe fabrication facilities that are extensively used in the Gulf area. We have some located in South Carolina. Those would be the kind of facilities that would see a bump up in jobs as a result of that. We are, as a country now, we're looking at, given the huge sources of natural gas being provided by fracking, that we will get to a point where we'll be potentially a net exporter of gas in the United States. That means LNG facilities that could be built along the coast. That means a lot of chemical companies, which previously had shifted operations to the Middle East and Asia, are shifting those back to the U.S.
Would that lower the cost of energy in North Carolina, or would all that be exported and we would?
Well, absolutely. If you're a Piedmont Gas or other customer of gas, you're going to see a dip in your gas prices. One of the reasons that industries are thinking about coming back to the United States is because access to that lower cost energy, which is a major input for manufacturing, things like plastics, significant user of natural gas feedstocks, you know, that's not offshore anymore. That people are seriously thinking about bringing those in the United States, and those are the kind of manufacturing jobs that our country's really been begging for the last 10 years.
We're going to bring our guest on because we're clearly getting some traction here in policy and some of these things around energy development. Before we do that, next week on our program, as we head into a very interesting time politically in this country, and you could say historically, we will have our Carolina Politics Roundtable. Included in that is Winthrop University Prof. Karen Kudrowski, who's been on this program before. Out of South Carolina, there's a thing called State House Report. Andy Brack is the publisher. Andy will be on this program with us. Susan Roberts from Davidson College, a public policy and policy sci expert up there. And finally, from NC Free Enterprise, Jonathan Kepler will also be on this program. What happens to the world, our everyday life, when the flow of energy stops? You know that feeling when the power goes out in your house, or better yet, when the flow of energy is just disrupted for a day or a week due to some natural or other disaster. We know that feeling. When you really stop and think about it, though, it is truly amazing that for decades this country and our communities have had dependable flow of oil to continually power our lives, but to go a bit further, the implications of our oil extend way beyond keeping our iPads charged. It includes job creation, domestic energy policy, homeland security, among a list of other things. Joining us now is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute, Jack Gerard. Jack, welcome south, and it's nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, Chris.
Jack, let's go back to something that happened in 2003, and I just found out prior to this program that this guy here was the interim chairman during this disaster at the NRC. In 2003, August of 2003, the great Northeast blackout affected 55 million people from the northeastern United States up through Canada. Does it take, and we just heard about the headlines, 600 million people in India affected by a blackout. Does it take this kind of being on the edge of chaos for us to implement some serious policy reform in energy? Or is there some other way that we're going to get to this?
Well, I think there's two answers to that, Chris. The first one is we certainly hope not. We certainly hope it doesn't take a crisis every time to get the public policy necessary or to get it right so we can move energy policy forward. The second aspect, though, that Jeff touched on just a moment ago is the job creation potential here. And I think that clearly has the public's attention. Just a week or so ago, we did another national survey that showed 92% of the American people understand that when we talk about oil and gas development, the business we're in, they recognize there's a direct correlation to job creation. And what we're seeing today in states like North Dakota, a lot of people don't know much about, second largest oil producer, the median income or wage in North Dakota in the oil and gas business is $90,000 a person. The median wage for everybody else in North Dakota, $45,000. So when you look at states like Pennsylvania, when you talk about natural gas development, the potential right here in the Carolinas to participate, we're talking about good, well-paying jobs at a time we need it most. So I think those issues are also going to come into play. You see the president talking about it. You see Governor Romney now talking about it. I think energy is going to be a hot topic going into the fall election. And I think the public's ready for a sound, comprehensive policy where we really start looking at our own resources like natural gas in the Carolinas and say, how do we put this forward, produce American energy by Americans for Americans? So I'm hopeful that economic dynamic will help push us to a sound policy.
Jack, would this be as easy of a sell on policy reform if we hadn't gone through the Great Recession, if we didn't have these high unemployment numbers and a lot of pain?
Well, it's interesting. The public focuses on what's most important. At any given time, I think we're all focused on the same things. How we feed our families, how we put them through school, how we plan for our retirements. But what's happened today is the economic circumstance in this country, the adverse nature of it, has really got us laser focused on job creation and economic recovery. And I think when you attach to that this new energy equation, when you look at the potential in the United States today, we have never before, at least not in our lifetimes, seen what we have before us today. As a world economist said just a few months ago, if we get the policy right, the United States can become the new Middle East for energy production. As Jeff mentioned, we have the potential to not only produce everything we consume, but to potentially export it. Now we're not reliant on unstable parts of the world. We don't have to worry about what's going on in the Middle East for pure energy considerations. There are obviously other considerations we look at. We don't have to worry about the demand taking place in China.
If we get down that road on policy.
That's right. If we get there. And that's why I hope we can do it if we stay focused on it and think what's in the best interest of our country.
Jeff?
Well, Jack, one of the issues I think we've all seen is that there are extraordinary opportunities to produce energy in the United States, much of which is trapped on federal lands. You come from a state that has significant federal land holdings. More recently, the Obama administration has come out with some policies. Secretary Salazar has opened up part of the Naval Petroleum Reserve in Alaska for production, but left a lot of it aside. How do we get to a policy, a national policy, where we can, in an environmentally sensitive way, tap into those national assets that currently are off the table?
Well, I think it's really got to come from the ground up. And what I mean by that is I think the American people have to rise up and say enough's enough. For 30, 35 years in this country, we've had only over 85% of our outer continental shelf off limits. You look at the situation here in the Carolinas now, clear almost 2-to-1 support for development in the outer continental shelf. It's almost, 3 out of every 4 support for development onshore. And I believe the American people are better understanding the energy equation in this country, and I hope they do continue to rise up. What we're finding in our industry is we're communicating on a daily basis with people through the social media tools. I think the communication forms in society today have really changed the ability to engage this debate and elevate it such that we get to sound policy. If you look at where this administration has been, they've put 85% of our outer continental shelf off limits once again. Now that's unnecessary. We're the only industrialized nation in the world that does that. Mm-hmm. And then we wonder why we can't compete. It all comes back to energy. If you want that manufacturing base you talk about, affordable, reliable energy brings that back. And it benefits consumers. As you mentioned earlier, Chris, the result of natural gas going from $13 to about $3 today saves consumers about $500 million a day because of that price drop, almost a quarter of what we used to pay for it. So if we keep producing that domestically, we're going to pay less for our heating, our air conditioning, our electricity. And at the end of the day, the more money in our citizens' pockets, I think, drives this conversation. We ought to do more about it as a nation here at home.
Judge?
As a follow-up on Jeff's question, if you were an energy czar, a benevolent dictator with power to say where we explore offshore, what would your priorities be? What areas, and specifically, where would the offshore of North and South Carolina fit into this?
Well, I think, Judge, it's a great question because we do need to prioritize. I think the first priority needs to be a comprehensive policy that's truly in all of the above. Oftentimes people look at the oil and gas business and say, well, it's self-serving, you're just after your interest. Not true. We need wind, we need solar, we need all renewables, ethanols. The oil and gas industry are the single...
Nuclear, too.
And nuclear, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, Jack.
I figured you'd represent that, Jack. But in that process, we need to recognize we need to develop all of them. The oil and gas industry are the single largest investors in all those renewable forms of energy. But when you look at priority, we have great experience in the Gulf of Mexico. We've been there about 60 years. We've drilled over 42,000 wells. We have produced about 8 times more energy in the Gulf of Mexico than anyone ever thought possible. Now, it's been 35 years since we've looked off the coasts of North and South Carolina. We're really not sure what's there, but the early indicators we had 30 years ago, it has promise. So we need to get back out there with modern technologies and take a look today with our 3D and 4D seismic to really find. So after the Gulf of Mexico, we'd look to the South Atlantic. Alaska just sits up there. Everybody knows there's vast resources. Unfortunately, the decision by the President, the National Petroleum Reserve, was an area set aside by the Congress to develop oil and gas. In the recent announcement by the administrations, they took half of that off limits. So we're going in the wrong direction. But the Carolinas have great potential, working with Virginia, strong support in your states, which surprises a lot of people. There's actually support on the coastline for this.
Jack, I want to come back to something that happened in 2008 in an industry that I know, and that is in banking. And what happened when banks got full control? You know, the Chinese wall between investment banks and general banking came down, and banks really... You could make the argument that ran amok, and I think many people are concerned. I think everyone will nod in agreement that, yeah, we need energy reform, and we should do some of these things here domestically. But there is a real concern, and they're not just Birkenstock and dreadlock folks. I mean, there is a real concern that not just petroleum, but energy is going to take this ball and really run with it and not worry about conservation or in the environment. So I guess how does the energy industry self-police and make sure that they don't keep stepping over a line?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that, Chris, and it's a great question, because we've got to make sure the American people have confidence in the way we go about our energy development. And the first response to that, and the first dimension, is all the environmental laws apply to the oil and gas industry. So when we're talking about clean air, clean water, et cetera, we have to meet all the same standards other industries have to meet. In fact, there are unique statutes that apply only to the oil and gas development. The second part of that, as it relates to self-policing, the American Petroleum Institute that I represent was originally started close to 100 years ago as a standard-setting organization. And we have independent third-party certified groups that develop best practices. We set those out, and then we encourage regulators and other folks to adopt those best practices, which raises the standards for everybody in the industry. What a lot of people don't realize is following the very unfortunate incident in the Gulf with the Macondo spill, the first thing the Department of Interior did was adopted our best practice to raise the standard on the entire oil and gas industry. So we recognize that's our responsibility as an industry. The only other thing I'd add, and this goes back to the judge's good work and others in looking at energy policy right here in the Carolinas, is as it relates to hydraulic fracturing, there's a lot of misinformation out there about our technologies. Hydraulic fracturing's been around for 65 years. We've drilled over 1.2 million wells with it, and there has never been a case of groundwater contamination as a result of hydraulic fracturing. So while we hear a lot of misinformation taking place, there are a lot of people who don't want development of fossil fuels who say a lot of things that aren't factual. So our hope and effort is to come out, to go on programs like yours and others that are widely viewed and have a factual conversation about energy. We can produce in North Carolina, benefit the manufacturing communities and others, and we can do it protecting the environment and protecting our people that work in the industry. So that's part of our effort, is to have that dialogue, and you're absolutely right. We need to protect those assets as we move forward to develop this energy.
Jeff?
Well, how do we get beyond one of the the talking points you always hear is, well, on any given parcel that one might explore, that's only going to provide 16 days of our national supply, and it's a clever way, I suppose, of folks who are opposed to some of this production to think about that. But it seems to me our production is really the inputs of oil and gas from a whole variety of locations. How do you counter those kind of challenges when people look at it on sort of a parcel by parcel basis with some of these areas?
Well, as a lot of people say, Jeff, and as you know, some would suggest all politics are local. So sometimes it becomes literally permit by permit. But when you look at it holistically and in the collective, you see great benefit to society generally. I like to use the case of North Dakota. Many people don't realize today North Dakota is the #2 oil producer in the United States. This year it surpassed Alaska and California. The only state ahead of them is Texas. But they now produce 640,000 barrels a day. Just 7 or 8 years ago, no one would have thought that possible. But what happened is the state came together, and this is all on private and state land by and large. On federal lands, there's restrictions and you can't access those lands. But on private and state land, they've come together. They've developed a very robust regulatory regime to protect the environment, protect their workforce. And what we're seeing today is little old North Dakota has a 2.9% unemployment rate. And many people go to North Dakota and you can't find the unemployed. McDonald's pays about $18 an hour. They give you a $1,500 signing bonus to go to work at McDonald's. And most times they have to shut them down a little early because they don't have enough workforce to take care of the people. Little towns of 12,000 are now 20,000 people. But it's a huge renaissance because of these modern technologies of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. And so when we look at it holistically, we can become energy self-sufficient right here in the United States in about a decade if we could produce our own energy. And it's got not only the benefits of job creation, revenue generation. The oil and gas industry contributes $86 million a day to the federal government. That could actually grow without any change in tax policy. So we look at deficits, we look at budget concerns in the country. Let's go back to allowing that economics to occur collectively, and it provides great benefits overall.
Let me ask we're running out of time, Jeff. We have less than a minute left, and I'm sorry, Judge, I'm going to have to take control of this back because we're running out of time. Just very quickly, Jack, please. And I hate to put you on the spot about trending oil prices, but through the balance of the year, would you expect the price at the pump going up, staying the same, or down?
We don't predict the price. It's difficult to know. If we could predict price, we wouldn't be doing the show today.
Okay.
But what you generally see is look closely at the crude oil cost and the factors that influence that. That's the primary driver that dictates the price of gasoline. If the instability in the Middle East were to settle down, if we as a country put our act together, produce more, it'll put downward pressure on that price.
Last word. Thank you. And thanks to the Charlotte World Affairs Council for sharing your visit here. Judge, thank you. Jeff, good to see you again.
Thanks again.
Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.